So while he's pulling it up, I'll just give you a little bit of introduction to me. I've been around this industry a long, long time, way too long probably. But I do a lot of work. I happen to be vice chair of 90.1. I used to be the past chair of the unitary large section. I'm chair of the chiller section. So I do a lot of stuff in terms of regulations, and actually spend all next week in Washington. So my pitch is going to be not just California. We always kid you guys as the Republic of California because you're a separate nation. But you know, a lot of stuff we look at is the U.S. and actually globally now. Especially a lot of work in Canada, a lot of work. I just had a nice meeting last week with Singapore, who's doing some really, really interesting stuff with rebates. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm in a company called Climate Controls and Security, which is the old Carrier. We also own a security division. I'm in a unique division that's kind of new for a big company. I'm in a group called Innovation and Research. And we go off and do things that are kind of out of the ordinary. We'll put stuff on roofs. I've got units on roofs down in California. And we'll do stuff that's trying to get new technology in. So one of the things I try and do is push new technology, and rebates are a big supporter of that part of it. So I'm going to give you a kind of this 5 things I'll go through pretty quickly. I'll just give you an overview of the upstream rebate programs. I actually have a diagram of it. I'm a typical engineer. I like to flow chart it, so I have a flow chart of it. You know, how are they being used in utilities? What manufacturers think of the upstream rebates? What impact have they had on manufacturers? And then what would we like you guys to consider in rebate programs? We're trying to change the way we go about our business a little bit, and sometimes rebates can be a big advocate. So here's the flow chart, and this isn't something I developed. There's actually a nice report. I'll give you a reference to it on upstream rebates, and it's a good multi-page report. But you can kind of see the three streams. For years and years, we've always had downstream rebates. Those go to the end-use customers, and from a manufacturer, what they always ask us to do is, well, just give me a discount and you fill the paperwork out for me. They don't like to do the paperwork. So, you know, along came midstream, and a lot of us call it upstream rebates. A lot of the rebates now go to distributors. Distributors really like them, and I'll tell you in a minute, you know, why they like them and what it's done to some of our businesses. And then you can go upstream rebates, it's just the true one all the way with a manufacturer where we get in some sort of agreement. So that's not as common. I think most people, when they talk about upstream, are talking about that midstream rebates, and it was kind of mentioned earlier. So one of the groups that we work with a lot is the Consortium for Energy Efficiency, and they're a group that basically represents 47 of the largest utilities around the country, and we meet with them yearly. We actually have pilot programs with them now. I just talked to them a few weeks ago. But they had a nice report that they put out, and I'll give you guys the references to all these reports so you can go look at them later. And they broke down into the various types of rebate programs, and I kind of spiked out the upstream rebates. There's only 9 of them out there, and most of them tend to be in California, and you know, it's about 10% of the market. Most of them go after the other tiers, and you know, as a manufacturer, we now have, on the average, take our rooftops, we have 3 different tiers heading towards 4 tiers, and that's really to meet all the different tiers out there in the market. But typically 80% of our business is minimum efficiency. That's where most of our business goes, really. Now, upstream rebates are shifting that, and we can definitely see that in California. So the other thing I found is CE had a nice report of where do they give money for rebates. So you can see unitary air conditioners, water-cooled evaporative air conditioners. So Mark probably likes that one, right? And you know, that's starting to grow a little bit. Heat pumps, you can see air-cooled VRS. VRS is a very fast-growing business. Ground source heat pumps, PTACs. One of the things you don't see on this, and they don't track it well, is the large systems. There are some good rebate programs on large chill water systems, and some of those are upstream rebates. And actually, I know my son is a salesman in California. He got a very nice check for one of your upstream rebates, so helped him pay for his house last week. So the other thing, there was a very nice report that was put out, and I'll give you a reference to this report later on. But it summarized what upstream rebates have done. And PG&E was one of the first ones that did this. And it kind of shows they had downstream rebates, which are kind of shown there in the red. You can kind of see them here. Then they went to an upstream rebate, and you can kind of see how many tons of HVAC were involved in it. Then they had buyer's remorse, and they went backwards. And you can see it dropped right off. And now they're pretty much all into the upstream rebates. And they're actually doing very well. This is actually influence what we stock. We actually stock different equipment now for California than we used to years ago with the downstream rebate. So it's actually helped us a lot in our business. So, what are manufacturers' impact on this? What I've seen from salesmen, and I talk to a lot of our salesmen in the field, it encourages salesmen to sell higher efficiency instead of trying to. This industry is very much cost-driven, especially when you get in with multiple bids. Everybody will try and bid the lowest cost thing, but if you can start to get energy involved and there is rebate money involved, then the salesman will start to sell a higher efficiency piece of equipment. And we've started to see that typical 80-20 rule, 80% minimum efficiency, 20% higher efficiency starting to shift. And I don't have the metrics for California. I meant to pull that, just didn't get a chance. But it's actually influenced us what we're doing. I did talk to our local distributor out here, and it's changed what he's stocked. And we see that in the orders he's placed. And I know it was brought up earlier about that's a big deal for manufacturers. Some of our manufacturers will have $5-10 million of inventory sitting on the ground, especially this time of the year when replacements come in. So if they know there are rebates involved, they will stock higher efficiency equipment, influence us as a manufacturers, what we build and where we go down that road. Mainly, I talked to our residential guys, and basically they said they see rebates really primarily with new construction. They don't see it as much for replacement. Now, maybe a little bit different in California, but they basically said, most of it goes for new construction. Keep in mind with our business for HVAC, 60-80% of our business is replacement, growing quite a bit. And we expect that'll change, especially as we get into, and I know we're going to talk later about refrigerants, that'll change as we move forward with new refrigerants. We do strongly support the upstream rebates. We've seen positive benefits. When I talked to our marketing department before I came out here, they said, we really like those. Can you find more details where they're going? It's really difficult for us as a manufacturer, to really track all these rebates. Yeah, we can track them for California, but we got 50 states, we got international groups, and it's very, very difficult. And I actually, in preparation for this meeting, I stumbled across this spreadsheet that has every rebate program, at least for commercial. And the marketing guy found that was really, really helpful, and I'll give you guys a copy of where you can find that. We'd like to see rebates kind of move up the food chain. And in a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've been trying to do, and we actually have a bill in Congress, or it'll ever come out of Congress. Senator Wyden has written a new energy bill on trying to change WEGO about energy efficiency. And we're trying to go away from the component approach, but take into account systems. Look at ductwork losses, look at the rest of the building, because the energy savings there are far greater than they are at a component approach. And, most of you guys, and he'll like this, is, we are starting to run out of runway. I mean, there is the second law of thermodynamics, and there's certain things we just can't make equipment more efficient. Chillers were actually there. So I'll talk in a minute about that. We'd also like to see more discussion with the manufacturers. We can give more information in terms of what rebates are coming, where we should do rebates, some of the things. So that gets into the MOUs and trying to understand some of that stuff. So one of the charts that I've worked up, and I use this in a lot of my discussions with Washington, and this is actually we used with Senator Wyden. For years and years, we've always focused down here. We kind of think of HVAC as an appliance, and which kind of bugs me because it's really not an appliance. It's not a light bulb. It's not on and off. It does have an impact on weather. Many of us manufacturers kind of resist regional requirements, but we're coming to the conclusion that there has to be regional requirements. There is 3 residential now. It's actually against the law to have regional ones for commercial. It's in the Energy Policy Act, so that's something we're trying to change. But globally, we've done a lot of work on terms of quantifying the world into 19 climate zones, and we're trying to make sense out of that now. And it's been really helpful. I just made a lot of lobbying with the Saudi Arabia government in terms of what their regional requirements are. So we have a different set of rating conditions for them. So, we've always focused here, but then we started to come up with combined metrics. One of the ones we've been working with CE for probably the last 5 years and haven't quite got to a rebate program. We came up with a metric where we took a rooftop plus an energy recovery. It's not a big deal in California because you have mild climates, but one of the ones that we had in mind is there a combined metric for an evaporatively cooled pre-cooler and a rooftop. Could you get a rebate on that? So we're working with them. We're hopefully going to make some progress on that. It's always difficult for utilities to understand it because they want validation of it. So we've gone out and showed them real buildings, what the savings are, and they're always worried that, you know, hey, do I have to pay a lot of money that I wasn't planning on? Then we're starting to look at a lot of annualized metrics. And, you know, you probably have all have heard of IPLV, which we use on chillers. We have IER on rooftops. We have SEER, and then we have a new one called, really innovative name, SEER 2 is coming. That'll come in a few years. And we're working on an IER 2 that takes into account more of the system. And these are things that, you know, like the IER was a very interesting one. It changed the way our industry actually goes about efficiency. So we have a weighted average on a rooftop. And as of next year, that'll become the minimum metric the DOE uses. And DOE put a challenge out, kind of like what Mark has done. They said, we challenge you to get to an 18 IER. We were at 12s. And inside of a year, we were at 18s, actually 20s. And it changed the way you design a product. You look at number of stages, you look at fan control, you look at things like that. But those are, you know, 40 to 50% energy savings. You're not going to get that by oversizing a condenser coil. So, you know, a lot of work's been going in that area. And then there's things, I don't know if any of you guys have ever worked on data centers, but on data centers, in ASHRAE 90.1, we put in a PUE, which is it's a metric on the ratio of IT energy to cooling energy. So if you use no cooling energy to keep that data center cool, you got a PUE of 1. So we've actually set PUE limits in 90.1. We don't, and this is my side from a manufacturer, we hate it when you tell us how to design a product. You know, put an evaporative cooler on it. There's one in 90.1 that really bothers me. It tells you what the head pressure set point is for a refrigeration system. We don't need those type of details. But this is kind of an open one. So, you know, if I wanted to get there by putting evaporative cooling on, or I wanted to get there by using a hydronic economizer or an air side economizer, it just helps me at PUE, but I can get there any way I want. The key thing when you get to these type of metrics, they're not simple numbers. Now it takes a tool. So one of the things we've been working on in the industry are tools that become commercially available that people can go in, and I kind of put them like Intuit software. It's kind of smart under the hood, but anybody can use it. Now the building modelers don't like when I talk about this because it takes their business away, but less than 20% of the buildings out there get modeled. So if we can get more people modeling their buildings, then we can get there. And there's certain places like Europe has passed what they call a second European directive, which is they're much farther ahead than the US. Canada is actually farther ahead. They're trying to come up with a thing called a beam standard that lets you model very, very quickly. So we're trying to get to that with these type of PUE metrics. Then we get the regional combined metrics. We're working actually on a proposal now for a chill water system. We're looking at 2 pilot sites that we want to work with the utilities, and we're doing this with CEE. Then you can get into complete system metrics. This is where you look at the whole building. Many of you guys that are familiar with lead submittals and ASHRAE 90.1, they've now made a third compliance path called Appendix G, and it's set the base year as 2004, so everything stays fixed now. So every 3 years as we raise efficiencies, you're building a small school. It says you got to be at 63% of the base to qualify. So it makes modeling much easier. Guys are always using the same base model, so that's going to increase modeling a little bit more. And then complete building systems. This is, you know, looking at the BEQ and some of those metrics. You're starting to see labels go on buildings. That's been done in New York City and a few other cities. That's helped a lot. And there are some rebates being tied to this. This is one where I met with the building guy from Singapore, and he set a energy efficiency metric for chilled water buildings. And then he also has a mandatory recommissioning. And if you got to recommission every so many years, state of Washington has just implemented the same thing. You got to go back and recommission your building, so some rebates are tied to those. And then complete building complexes. We don't see this as much in the US, but you get to places like India and China, they build whole cities. So then you can start trading energy. If I got a data center stuck in the middle of a building, can it sell heat to another building? And we actually did a building like that in Switzerland, where the data center is now operating at a profit because it's selling its heat to the city, and they're getting more revenue from the hot water they're selling to the city. And we put a booster heat pump on it to boost it up. So some of the neat things they're doing overseas. So this is some reference material I ran across, and it was brought up about a report on upstream rebates. This is a really nice report that was put together that goes through all of the benefits and pluses and minuses of upstream rebates. It's a real good report to take a look at. So you guys can download that, and Mark, I think we can pass this presentation out to everybody. You know, they can get at it. And then CE has some really nice databases. This is a database that has where all the rebates are around the country. And then this is a summary of what some of the rebate programs and CEs come up. One of the things they try and do, which we like as a manufacturer, we come up with common program templates. Now, one state may say, I'm going to do an IER. The other one says, I'm going to do an IER and a full load metric because they have peak. But there are various ways that you can get to that. So with that, I'll stop.
Are there any questions for our panel members? Dick? Well, I'll be right over there.
How's that? Should be about here, I guess. So in my semi-retired state, I've been not paying as much attention as I should have probably to utility programs. But one thing that I'm seeing is that there are a number of pretty well developed and demonstrated evaporative pre-cooling systems now, particularly for rooftop units, that have real-time web-based reporting, so anybody with the authority can get online and make sure things are really working, and I think that's a good thing. And these technologies are being addressed, I think, mostly to the retrofit market because that's obviously the biggest potential market. But economics are tenuous in some cases, at least if you make a system that's of high enough quality to last and give customers confidence that it's going to be there. So I want to ask a question about utility movement for new buildings and replacement RTUs. One of the really nice potentials for improving the economics is to take advantage of that capacity increase so that when a new building is built, if you have a reliable evaporative pre-cooling system, you can downsize the rooftop unit, and you can do that at replacement time as well. And I think one of the issues historically has been a lack of confidence that these components will keep working. There's also that reliability issue for the RTU itself, but when you have two different pieces that have to work together, maybe it becomes more of an issue. But it feels like we've been moving toward a situation where the reliability of the pre-coolers has increased and the economics for the customer could be significantly enhanced if the equipment is downsized. This isn't always in the manufacturer's interest, the RTU manufacturer, because they'd probably rather sell more tons, but it's certainly in the utility's interest because then you can be sure that the connected capacity for that building, whether it's a new building or a RTU retrofit, is going to be lower, and that, of course, from the demand perspective has an advantage. So, sorry to be so long-winded here, but the question is, has there been much contemplation about programs that incent evaporative pre-cooling for new buildings and replacement HVAC units?
Is it still? Yeah, it's still on. I think the answer to your question is yes and no, I think. We actually tried to do a program a few years ago that just was focusing on that evaporative pre-cooling. And I think and we actually were awarded the program, but after about a month, the utility changed its mind and stopped it. And it's not Paul, so it's another utility that may or may not be present in this room today. But I think the big issue with that really comes down to, and Paul may be able to add to this from his perspective, is just really the quantification of energy savings, right? I mean, today in California, most of these programs are either they claim energy savings by way of DEER, which is Database for Energy Efficiency Resources, I think it stands for, or a work paper which documents what the savings should be for that piece of equipment, or they're kind of customized where there's kind of pre and post measurement to determine the energy savings. And as of a couple of years ago, I don't know what the status is today, but there was no approved work paper or DEER measure for evaporative pre-cooling, and it's cost prohibitive to do the pre and post monitoring, especially what we were looking at was kind of just more of a pilot, so it was only going to be a handful of units. So to do that pre and post monitoring, it becomes more of a research project than a customer rebate program, and we just couldn't justify kind of doing that. And the utility didn't really have the interest in paying for that to be done as well, because they're not getting any credit for it on the other end either. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Paul.
Well, just a few things. So yeah, I support all of what Paul was saying here. And I think the question really gets at more of a measure issue as opposed to programmatic. From a programmatic standpoint, you're going to include a suite of measures into whatever ultimately builds out into your program. And I think that in the future, because the utilities will not be designing programs. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at you over there. There could be some opportunity for that, certainly. We wouldn't say no, but to Paul's point, from a measure standpoint, it's got to prove itself out in terms of claimable energy savings per the construct that we're all dealing with, if that makes sense. And what Paul was saying is like you kind of have these two different routes, the DEER or deemed versus customized. And I don't know, maybe someone from emerging technologies has a comment about where that kind of technology has been or is right now. I don't know if Christian's worked on that. So Christian Weber is from PG&E, and he's a really sharp guy. It's a work paper measure right now? And it's approved in... Okay.
Yeah, I can maybe add a little bit, having been trying to sell rebates like with energy recovery, you usually have to have a standard. So Mark was mentioning he's got 212 coming along. That's a testing standard. Then a lot of utilities really like to have certification programs that a third-party lab is validating it. So like, Energy Star, we test all of our equipment, it's validated, routinely inspected. So that gives you guys confidence that, the savings are going to be there. So
I think I'd like to jump in on this just for a sec. Basically, there are two things. One is that I think that the WCEC, and we've been sort of spending a lot of our time and effort in this area, I hesitated on sort of going too far with it until we had the standard to point to, which Dick just mentioned. The other thing is that there's currently an effort going on by a group called CalTF, or California Technical Forum, and their goal is to produce something called an electronic technical resource manual, which will in some way sort of replace DEER, I think, ultimately. And the idea, everything will be more publicly available. You can see what's going on. And I know I'm on that technical forum, that for this year, the focus is going to be on measures that are not lighting or HVAC, because they want to go on things that are less big ticket items, if you'd like. And then next year to look at gravitating towards HVAC and lighting. And I could see that as being an opening for looking at taking another look at these kind of technologies. All right, I have a question, but I talk too much. So somebody else in the audience, one second.
I'm Dave Diaz with Sheet Metal Workers, Local 104. I actually had the privilege of reading 5 of the IOU's business plans. Those were really fun, by the way. There's a couple things. I noticed that you guys are going away from downstream programs and more towards upstream and midstream. The only issue I have with that is it should, in my eyes, should be a system-wide thing because I'm a sheet metal worker. I can put the same piece of equipment in and put it in a few different ways and give you a different energy efficiency outcome on every one of them. So there should be something tied in with that in my eyes. And the other thing is with I just read the IOUs, not all the PAs, the RENs, or anything else, but you guys didn't really agree on the commercial end anyhow on size of projects. In other words, SD, G&E, PG&E, SC&E, and SoCal Gas all had different sizes for small, medium, and large. In other words, if a user was, I guess SD and G&E is 20 kilowatt hour, 20,000 kilowatt hours a year, and PG&E is like 50. So if you're going to do a statewide program, my question is, how are you going to do that if you don't agree?
So that's a key challenge, and I'm hoping that our implementers are going to present very, very compelling proposals on how to address that. But I mean, I've been thinking about this myself because I'm being new to San Diego. I just moved down there in December and started at SDG&E in January. And I got to tell you, I mean, I'm not the market research guru by any means, but just in looking at the business plans and some of the market research that was put forth for the creation of those, and some of my past experience working at Edison. Paul actually worked at Edison as well, and then I worked at the gas company. I mean, totally different markets. And I was so shocked. I had always heard that San Diego is, or SDG&E service territory is all about small commercial, there's no industrial. And I always heard of that anecdotally, but I mean, the data is there. It is absolutely true. And so I think that we couldn't necessarily agree on it because we were all focused on our particular markets. And Michelle you know Michelle Costello, she's my manager, and she probably has a much better response to this. But we did take, I think, we took an approach of looking at our individual markets to understand them and put that out in our business plan. The challenge now is going to be, I think, really in the hands of the implementers and the IOUs and negotiations for contracts with those implementers to make sure that there's a consistent approach across the state that does not favor one IOU service territory to the other. So if you go back to my slide on statewide program administration, there's a whole lot behind that's being developed right now. And there's a document that we filed as part of our application. So there's the application, which has kind of got the regulatory speak, which is the double space black and white pages, which is kind of boring, but it gives you a high level summation of what we're talking about. Then there's our business plan, which has got the graphics and all that kind of good stuff. There's another document that I think you're probably aware of it, Dave. The statewide, I always mess up the title, the general approach for statewide program administration. And there's multiple tenets in there that guide us to say that we need to make sure that the programs, however they come out statewide, are not going to favor one IOU service territory or the other, and not going to harm one versus the other. The first tenet is do no harm. And that's something that we take very seriously, and it keeps on getting reiterated. So it's a challenge. I don't think we have an answer right now. We're going to continue to work on that and think about that, be thoughtful throughout the process. And I think the implementers as well. We've got some really solid implementers for upstream HVAC in the state as well. They've got tons of experience on this. So those are some of the comments that I have to it. And the other comment that I had was to your first point. I don't think we're moving more programs upstream, but we did have a mandate that said that for all programs that we currently had upstream, midstream, we needed to move those into statewide program administration. So HVAC is an existing program, or we have an existing upstream, midstream HVAC program that fell under this, and all the other IOUs do as well. But as we go down the road, I think we're going to have to be thoughtful to see what really works. So. Good to meet you in person, Dave. I've heard you on the phone before.
Anybody else? Okay, I have a question, of course. So my question, I guess I'd like to hear each of your perspectives on the idea of, I think there's a little bit of friction between the idea of having something be sort of one size fits all at the upstream level and moving to sort of system performance, where systems are obviously somewhat more custom. And do you see, how do you view how to bridge that gap, and where do you think things will go? And do you see, if you're thinking system, like from the manufacturer perspective, how do you manage to sort of deal with the fact that it's going to be more custom than upstream? And how would a manufacturer deal with a custom kind of program?
So I grabbed the mic from Paul because I said I wanted to start because my answer is going to be the shortest. I think that the short answer is we don't know. And if you look at, I can't remember which number slide it was, but it was the slide that I had talking about where efficiency is going in the state of California and how we used to have 3-year program cycles. We're moving to 10-year rolling portfolios. We're going from widget-based programs and efforts to more system-based comprehensive efforts. And so it's definitely something that is recognized at the utilities and the commission as the direction that we need to go. How we get there, I'm going to let these two gentlemen who are much more intelligent than me comment on. But I offered a little preamble there.
So I think, it's kind of like goes to what the slide that I had up there as well that said, we have to meet customers where they are. So some customer may just want to need to replace his equipment. So it's an emergency replacement, something breaks down, he needs to replace it. Ideally we want to try and influence that to happen and be a more efficient piece of equipment. So you want to have the program that can handle that. But I agree that, if we're trying to get to, the doubling of energy efficiency in the state as directed by SB 350, we need to have much more comprehensive type of programs that deal with more things instead of these discrete little programs that deal with HVAC, deal with lighting, deal with plug loads, deal with this, deal with that. Because what we see from the implementation side of that is, again, I also mentioned that when we hit the customers with all these different options of things to do, the customer just doesn't understand and they don't know what to do. We saw that, you mentioned Prop 39 earlier, we implement a schools program, and I put a slide together once for like a similar type of form to this, and I can identify probably like 30 or 40 different entities that are telling the school how best to spend their Prop 39 money, and the customer, in reality, they're just saying like, we don't know what to do, and we're not. And I think if you look at the numbers, there's not been a lot of people. There's been a lot of people that have not taken up on their Prop 39 funds. So what we really need to do is come with a much more strategic approach to, I think, building types and customer types, but allow them flexibility to interact with the program, and that makes the most sense for them. So if it is just a replacement, it's fine. If it's just the maintenance, it's fine. But when you're getting involved with those retrofit type opportunities, being comprehensive at that point, because you have the customer involved and you want to take every advantage you can to get as much as you can out of them at that point.
Yeah, it's a really tough question because, you look at manufacturers, they like to build the same thing on a high production line. And to give you an example, right now we make 11 trillion different rooftops just to meet all the various things that you guys asked for, and that's probably not enough. But, we know down the road that if you look at it as a complete system, there's a lot more energy to be saved. Really nice paper published in the ASHRAE Journal about what was done in Singapore, and they got 50% energy savings without major changes to the equipment. Key to it too is also recommissioning and maintenance and all those, because these systems get complex. So it's tough. I mean, one of the things we're trying to work on at AHRI, and I actually started a group called the Systems Steering Committee to look at how we're going to approach this, and it's a tough thing to do. But we're going to need new tools. We're going to need complete ratings on equipment, complete ratings that are verified and certified. So it's a big thing for our industry to really go after, and this is why we're looking at a couple pilot rebate programs to prove that it actually does work. So we're starting on a chilled water system, hopefully, is where we're going to go first.
Just one more thing. I'm not the expert on this, but I was thinking about Dick's presentation, and one of the things that I thought that stood out in my mind was better and simpler modeling tools. And so I think that would play a pretty significant part in that, significant role. And I don't know if anyone else has a better comment to that.
Well, I guess my thought on that is I understand kind of what's going on. I'm trying to figure out in my own head, can you imagine an upstream program that includes more than just the box, right? That includes that includes the modeling, right? Could a manufacturer sort of actually respond to such a thing? And how would the utilities view such an upstream program, as opposed to just sort of another, right, X-efficiency metric in the box?
I mean, I think our big issue is that they have to be claimable savings, and so we have to get to a point where we can claim. If we can claim it, we're good.
So if we could have work papers that were for system efficiency, and then manufacturers, who I think we're going to come back to the question of who gets the incentive for that. Can that be an upstream program? And could a manufacturer react to such a thing? I mean, Dick, I guess I'm looking at you a little bit.
I know this is moving forward in Europe, and I know you guys don't follow that much, but they have what they call a second European directive, and they've spent huge amount of time developing all the tools to get there, all the metrics to get there. Part of it is a new standard we're working on an ASHRAE 205, which is going to come up with a standard protocol for rating. But one of the things that's kind of interesting, if you look at the LEED program, and especially more so in Europe, you claim a certain rating on a building, your label goes up. If after a few years you don't deliver it, in Europe, they take your label down and you go from an A to a D. And I don't know if you guys have tracked some of these buildings now, but a label on a building that signifies energy efficiency actually can increase the rental value of the building. So a lot of the buildings are now getting very much interested in it, especially young people that come from this university now. Well, I want to live in an A building. I don't want to live in a D building. So it's starting to get some value.
So this is Christian Weber from PG&E. So one way of maybe addressing your question is in terms of AB 802, where you're doing meter-based savings. And so I'm wondering what the panel would think about, let's say, in-field ER measurements as a way of tracking the actual energy efficiency of the system installed, and finding a way to provide incentives that would incentives to get to a particular ER value and maintaining that.
It's very difficult to measure things in the field. There's a standard under development now, and I've never seen a standard go this fast. It's a standard called 221. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Mark, but it's actually to measure the delivered cooling out of the complete system. And some of the studies been done in California say we only get 68% of what you claim comes out of that rooftop unit coming out the duct. Well, it's leaking out the duct. It's going all sorts of different ways. So the standard is a good intent. In-field measurement is very difficult. We get into uncertainty of measurement. Just barometric pressure alone can cause a 4 to 5% variation. So, these are things that the industry has to work at. But, one of the things that's going to help a lot is this movement for connected buildings. Pretty soon, you're going to get a lot of data flowing out of buildings that you can use for a lot of reasons.
I guess that's where I was going. Not one point in-field measurements, but continuous monitoring of equipment as a way to track energy efficiency.
It's actually where I'll be for the next 2 days. There's a meeting in San Francisco on that subject.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think that's right. We have to get to where having the connected devices kind of measuring usage over time, because I think when you get to if you have to do individual field measurements, like Dick was saying, not only is it gets difficult to do, but when you have a bunch of different entities doing it, all these contractors, whoever would be doing it, probably has their own way of doing it and trying to, even though there's a standard, there's differences in how that would be applied. And then the other issue with that was also just making sure that it would be cost effective, that it doesn't impact the overall cost effectiveness of the various program. If we have to do send engineers out to do pre and post monitoring of systems, whether it be for commercial or residential buildings, it just gets to be cost prohibitive. So it's going to have to be dealt with through the connected thermostats and other things, and just smarter buildings.
There are also smart meters in California buildings that are not sub-metered, and I don't know, I guess rest of the country, I'm not sure where that has gone. Does CEE ever go there?
No, not as much, but what's starting to come now, and I was just at a meeting a couple weeks ago at Purdue, there's so-called virtual sensors. Now we can infer a lot of things without a lot of hard instrumentation. Just some of this thing in our equipment, we can tell, like I can tell you the capacity of a chiller by the expansion valve position pretty accurately, because it's a meter. So there's things like that that the industry is working at. Just an interesting thing, China has a very good way of doing this. When you exceed your power in your building, they turn your power off. So that's how they control it.
Subtle.
Just to add a little bit more, I mean, it really also comes down back to that argument, that discussion that we had earlier about just the claimable energy savings, DEAR versus customized approach. So we have to have a process that those savings can be accounted for and quantified, and the utility get credit for. I don't think today there is we have like O-Power and all these other guys out there, Nest, and all this different information's out there, but there's really no, I think, approved mechanism for how you say, okay, that system just saved that much energy.
Okay, are there any other questions? We are 8 minutes behind schedule, but if there are things that we'd like to chat about, or if you'd like to have lunch, you can vote by not asking more questions. Hi. All right. Well, let's thank our panelists, please. Food is that way. Eat some on the way here, and then work your way that way and go on the tours.